Hello, By Faith Christian Church community, where we walk by faith and not by sight. I have an Easter message for you, and I decided to come over to the church so I could be in the sanctuary to bring this Easter Sunday message to you. So, I want to start off by wishing everyone a safe and happy, blessed Easter. And so, we're going to go ahead and get into our message for today. And we will be in Luke, the 23rd chapter, starting at the 26th verse. And then we will also talk about a few verses from Luke, the 24th chapter. And so today's message is caring in times of darkness. And so when you think about the Easter story and what led up to Easter, it was such a tragic event. However, we know that in the very end, we know that Jesus rose with all power and all authority. And so I thought about this message because we're still in this coronavirus pandemic, and we know that the number of deaths are increasing every day and the number of positive cases. So it can feel like a time of darkness. However, this message is to hopefully encourage you today, to let you know that there's still care and love going on in this world in the time of darkness. So we're going to go ahead and get started. So we will be in Luke, the 23rd chapter, starting at the 26th verse, and we will read verses 26 through 28, and then we'll pick back up again and start at verse 32 and go through the 56th verse. So let's get started. As they led Jesus away, a man named Simon, who was from Cyrene, happened to be coming in from the countryside. The soldiers seized him and put the cross on him and made him carry it behind Jesus. A large crowd trailed behind, including many grief-stricken women. But Jesus turned and said to them, "Daughters of Jerusalem, don't weep for me, but weep for yourselves and for your children." So let's stop there and take a look at these verses. And so here we are with Jesus on his way to be crucified. And they've recruited someone to help Jesus carry the cross. And as he was going through, it talks about there was a crowd, but there were still some in the crowd who were grief-stricken, and the Bible refers to them as grief-stricken women. So when you think about this scene and all of these people following Jesus, and they were the ones who yelled, "Crucify him," there was still some in the crowd who were grief-stricken by what was going on, and it says they were women. And so this was a time of darkness, but in this time there was still people in the crowd who cared about what was happening to Jesus at that time. And so he left some words with them, and he told them not to weep. And so that's another indication that they were grief-stricken, and that they were weeping along the way because they really cared about what was happening to Jesus. Verse 32. Two others, both criminals, were led out to be executed with him. When they came to a place called the Skull, they nailed him to the cross, and the criminals were also crucified, one on his right and one on his left. So let's stop there and talk about this. So Jesus, we know the story that there was a criminal on his right and a criminal on his left, and they were all there to be crucified. And when you think about, crucifixion, and what is it? Well, it was one of the worst ways that a person could be put to death. My study says that it was horribly painful, and it was a disgraceful form of capital punishment. And the thing about being crucified is that it was a slow, agonizing death. And so what they did is they bound their hands and they bound their feet, and then they put a nail in it, or a stake, and then they nailed them to this wooden cross. And so just think about that, just having your hands nailed and then having your feet nailed to a wooden cross. So this crucifixion, this wasn't an easy thing. There are a number of ways that they could have handled Jesus or put him to death, but they chose the worst form possible that you could use to put somebody to death back in those times. And so verse 34 says, Jesus said, Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they are doing. And so I love this part because, again, even in the darkest times, you think about Jesus being nailed to a cross, and then he's showing love at this time. He's saying, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they are doing. And so I just love that. It's like, how many of us can say that if somebody is after us, or somebody has done something wrong to us, or they hurt us in some kind of way, or caused some pain, that we will be asking God to forgive them? How many of us can say that? So this is an extraordinary love and care that Jesus was showing in a dark time. And then verse 34 goes on to say, and the soldiers gambled for his clothes by throwing dice. And I'm just going to stop there. And this made me think about that. No, even back then, when something's going on and somebody's being mistreated in dark times and things are not going the way that they should be going, there will always be some people around who will be taking advantage of a situation, who have no remorse or no sympathy or no caring for what's happening at that time. I mean, just imagine this, that you have 3 people being crucified and they're hung on the cross. They've been nailed to the cross and they're in so much pain, and then you actually have people who are gambling right in front of them, and they were gambling for Jesus's garments. It's just really hard to understand, but right before that, Jesus was showing his love, and he was saying, Father, forgive them. Even those people at that time who were gambling for his clothes, he was asking our Father for forgiveness. I mean, that's an awesome love that Jesus has for us. Now, in the 35th verse, it says, the crowd watched and the leader scoffed. He saved others, they said. Let him save himself if he is really God's Messiah, the chosen one. The soldiers mocked him too by offering him a drink of sour wine. They called out to him, if you are the king of the Jews, save yourself. A sign was fastened above him with these words, this is the King of the Jews. Okay, so what are they saying here? So Jesus is on the cross, and you've got people mocking him and taunting him and saying things to him, like, if you're really the Messiah and you performed all these miracles that you've claimed, and you've done all these things, and you're the chosen one, why don't you save yourself? And as I was thinking about this, I really know in my heart that Jesus, he could have gotten off the cross, but he stayed there for you and I. Again, his love and caring for us in the dark time. And then it talks about them mocking him and trying to give him this drink of sour wine. And we know that the sour wine and this drink that they used back during that time, it was used as like a medication, to numb the pain. So they were mocking him, and they were saying, if you're this Messiah, here, take this. This will make you feel better, but you should be able to make yourself feel better if you're really the Messiah. And then they took this and they put this sign above his head, like to even just mock him even more, saying, this is the King of the Jews. And they were mocking him, and they were saying, if you're really a king of the Jews, how in the world could you be affixed to a cross right now, and you're dying right before our very eyes? So it was all these things going on at this time. And I thought about this, the saying, adding insult to injury. So there's already enough going on. He's already on the cross. He's already going to die. And then they're still adding insult to injury. And then you also heard the saying, putting salt in the wound. And so they're just stirring it up. They're making it worse. And then the other saying I'm sure you're familiar with is kicking people when they're down. And I thought of all of this, like, couldn't they just put him on the cross and just let it go, But no, they wanted to up the ante and they wanted to add more to it by teasing and taunting Jesus during this dark time. Let's go on to the 39th verse. 39th verse. One of the criminals hanging beside him scoffed, "So you're the Messiah, are you? Prove it by saving yourself and you too while you're at it." But the other criminal protested, "Don't you fear God, even when you have been sentenced to die? We deserve to die for our crimes, but this man hasn't done anything wrong." Then he said, "Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom." So what are we talking about here? These two criminals hanging on each side of Jesus, and one is acting just like the crowd. So can you imagine being on your deathbed and you're going off like this man was, the way he was talking to Jesus, or better yet, talking to anybody in this manner? It seems to me like if you were on your deathbed, you would be asking God to help you or asking for forgiveness, but instead he's taunting Jesus the same way, and he's getting smart with him, and he's being disrespectful. Get us down. If you're the Messiah, save me and save yourself too. But I love what the other criminal said. He's like, "Hey man, don't you get it? You're not showing any respect here. Don't you even fear God? Like, you're getting ready to die and you're talking like this." And so the criminal asked Jesus, he said, "Please remember me when you come into your kingdom." So the thief even knew. He said, Jesus hasn't done anything wrong, but we have. And so he doesn't deserve this crucifixion, but we do. Okay? So we're going to keep on moving. And I love the next part because it really shows more of Jesus's love. And in the 43rd verse, Jesus said, and Jesus replied, "I assure you, today you will be with me in paradise." So think about that. Jesus is hanging on the cross and he's in so much agony and pain, but he takes a moment to show his caring and his love for the other criminal by saying, "You will be with me in paradise." And as I was thinking about this lesson and thinking about everything that's happening with the coronavirus, and it seems like just such dark times, but we're seeing here in this lesson there was still some love and caring going on in this lesson during this time, this Easter message for today. Let's go with the 44th verse. By this time it was about noon, and darkness fell across the whole land until 3 o'clock. The light from the sun was gone, and suddenly the curtains of the sanctuary of the temple were torn down the middle. Then Jesus shouted, "Father, I entrust my spirit into your hands." And with those words, he breathed his last. In the 44th verse, we know that about this time at noon, that's when it started to get dark. But we know Jesus hung on the cross from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. So it started to get dark, and the sun was just gone suddenly. And then there was this earthquake, and the veil of the temple, split in two. And so all this was happening with nature as Jesus was dying on the cross. And then he finally breathed his last breath. And so think about that. Think about that scene. On a normal day, is it dark? Starting at noon, to 3 o'clock? No, it isn't. And so those were things that were happening in nature because God was making a point here that this is my son. And think about this as we move to our next verses. We're going to talk about this Roman officer who was overseeing this crucifixion. So I'll go with the 47th verse. It says, when the Roman officer overseeing the execution saw what had happened, he worshiped God and said, surely this man was innocent. So think about it. It said the Roman officer, so he was overseeing the execution. So my thought would be that if he's an overseer, if he's in charge of this crucifixion, this execution, then this is probably not the first crucifixion that he's been to. This is probably not the first time that they've nailed somebody to a cross. They hung them high and they stretched them wide. And he says, surely this man was innocent, because they never saw the sun go down when they crucified someone, and they never felt the earthquake, and they never saw the veil of temple rent in two. So this Roman officer, he had a change about what he felt and what he thought about Jesus because all of this was happening. 48th verse. And when all the crowd that came to see the crucifixion saw what had happened, they went home in deep sorrow. So at this moment, you can imagine, the sun went down. Again, the earthquake, the veil of the temple rent in two. Now people are going home and they're in deep sorrow, because now they're reflecting. And again, some of these people, they had probably attended a crucifixion or something before, and now they're like, this has never happened before. And the 49th verse says, but Jesus' friends, including the women who had followed him from Galilee, stood at the distance watching. So even though his friends couldn't be up close, they were still there to witness this situation. So let's keep moving. In the 50th verse, again, we're talking about love and caring in the darkness, during dark times. And I don't want us to lose sight of that during this Easter message, because we're in dark times now. But I want people to realize that we can't lose sight of it, because even with all this that was going on with the crucifixion, there was still some love and some care going on during that time. The 50th verse. Now there was a good and righteous man named Joseph. He was a member of the Jewish High Council, but he had not agreed with the decision and actions of the other religious leaders. He was from the town of Arimathea in Judea, and he was waiting for the kingdom of God to come. He went to Pilate and asked for Jesus' body. So what are we talking about here? In the 50th verse, I love this part about this righteous man named Joseph, and it says that he was a member of the Jewish High Council, and he didn't agree with their decision. And so when you think about that, the Jews were primarily responsible for bringing Jesus forward up on these charges. He was a member of this Jewish High Council, but it says that he didn't agree. And I thought about that and I said, well, thank you, God, because what that says is that even though we look at all the things that are happening in high places, for example, at the federal level, at the government level, and we don't always know what the government is doing, and we don't understand the decisions that they're making, that God has people everywhere. It might not be a whole bunch of people, but God has people everywhere who will be there, who won't go along with everything that everybody says. And so they're there for us, just like God put Joseph as a member of this high council. He puts his people in high places too, and again, they are there to try to move things along, and they're not there to be in the amen corner and agree with everything the government is doing, but they're there to be a light in the situation. They're there to, when people are making decisions that will work against disadvantaged people, for example, or poor people, for example, or a certain race of people or gender people. God has people in place who are trying to work out those situations and undo things. And so Joseph, he was part of the high council, but he didn't agree with what the other religious leaders were doing. And I love this. So he went to Pilate and he asked for Jesus's body. And so here again, we see caring in a dark time. We see love in a dark time, because this is how it works. If you were crucified, then they would just take your body out on the outskirts of town, and they would just throw it out there, and they would let the buzzards and animals and whoever just eat your flesh. Whatever animal wanted to eat it, they could have it. But Joseph, he didn't want this for Jesus, and so he went to Pilate and he asked if he could have the body. 53rd verse. Then he took the body down from the cross and wrapped it in a long sheet of linen cloth and laid it in a new tomb that had been carved out of rock. This was done on Friday afternoon, the day of preparation, as the Sabbath was about to begin. So here again, we see caring and we see love as he took Jesus' body down and he wrapped it up in linen, and then he laid it in a tomb, and then he had to stop. And there was nothing else he could do at that time, because the rule was that when the Sabbath started, then all work ceased. It was supposed to be a day of worship and so forth. And then once Sabbath was over, then you could resume your normal business. So he wrapped him, put Jesus in a tomb, and he was done. Now the 55th verse says here, as his body was taken away, the women from Galilee followed and saw the tomb where his body was placed. And I love this part. It talks about, the women. I don't know why I didn't say men, but it says women. So they followed Joseph because they wanted to know, where is he taking the Savior? Again, their love and their caring during a dark time. And then the 56th verse says, then they went home and prepared spices and ointments to anoint his body. But by the time they were finished, the Sabbath had begun. So they rested as required by the law. So again, although the women prepared these ointments and these spices, because back then that's how they would prepare the body for burial. And so they wanted to make sure that Jesus received a proper burial. So they put these spices and ointments together so that they could go the next day after Sabbath was over and they would anoint Jesus's body. So again, loving and caring during dark times. Even though he had died, there were still those who wanted to love and to care for Jesus. Okay, so we're getting close to the end of our message, and I don't want to leave this part out because it is really the point of Easter, and there are so many themes that I can think of with Easter, but the one that I wanted to focus on today is the loving and caring during dark times, because that was a dark time. We're in dark times right now. So in Luke the 24th chapter, and that is the Easter message, and this is the part that after all the agony and the pain, this is the part that we really get excited about. This is the reason why we celebrate. And we know in the 24th chapter, we know that the women, they were on their way to anoint Jesus's body, and I love that because they were going to the tomb, and we know that once they put Jesus's body inside the tomb, we know that they rolled a stone in front of it. And so you have to wonder, how were the women going to roll back the stone to anoint his body? But they were going in faith anyway. And I love faith because, with faith, you know what you need to do. You just go on anyway, and then you trust God to fix it when you get there. And so, but when they got there, they looked and the stone was already rolled back. And they looked and they realized that, Jesus, he was not there. He was not there at all, because we know he rose. And then we know there were two men, it says, who were there, and they were in white clothing. And it talks about how they reminded them, don't you remember that he said that he would rise again on the third day? And so the women, they rushed back to tell the disciples and everyone, what had happened, that they went to the tomb and that Jesus was not there. And these men that were standing by, told them that he is risen, he is gone. And that is the Easter message for today. And even with that, some still didn't believe. And I'm going to end with the 12th verse because it's a lot here with this story. So however, Peter jumped up and ran to the tomb to look. Stooping, he peered in and saw the empty linen wrappings. Then he went home again, wondering what had happened. And so Jesus is gone. The body is gone. The linens and wrappings that Joseph put on him were still left there inside the tomb. And so Jesus rose on the third day, and I thank God for that, because that is our hope today. That even during these dark times, we know that Jesus rose, so we can rise up. It's not going to always be dark. We are going to have trials and tribulations. We are going to get through this corona thing, because we've got proof right here. This was a dark time when they had our Jesus on the cross, but there was love and caring going on through that time. And then in the end, Jesus had the victory. And so I was thinking about this, and I was like, well, God, what are people doing? How are people today showing love and caring, during this dark time as we deal with this coronavirus? And then I just started searching the internet and watching the news and listening to all kind of stories. And I ran across this one story where these restaurants, they had so much extra food, and with them being closed and everything that's going on, they started donating the food to people who needed it. And so that's showing love and care during these dark times. And then there were other stories about other businesses delivering food to hospitals and to our first responders, so that they can stay healthy and get a meal. And then I heard a story about these daycare workers, and that's a lot, even with the daycare workers, and people don't always think about that, but our first responders and our medical workers, people who are on the front lines, they can't stay home with their kids like people can and work from home. They have to go to work. So there were some daycares that kept their doors open so that first responders and medical workers could go to work. And then there was this player from the Cleveland Cavaliers, and he donated $100,000 to the sports arena. And the purpose of that money was so that the hourly workers who would miss pay because they're not having games would receive pay. There was so much, and I just love these beautiful celebrations that people were taking part in, outside of their homes, and like people riding by and honking horns saying happy birthday and celebrating anniversaries, through the window at nursing homes. And so there are so many things that people are doing to show their love and care during these dark times. And I was watching Tonight Show, and I saw Taraji P. Henson and what she was doing now. She's donating money. She has a nonprofit where she's donating money, and she's also raising money so that there can be mental health services available to people during these times. Again, showing love and care during dark times, and all these food drives, and you saw all the cars lined up, and they're giving out thousands and thousands of boxes of food to people who need it. And then this one story, of course, it was interesting to me because I'm in the field of education, but there's this company that offers free online learning software, so families can get online and they can continue instruction and education. And then some of the companies, cable companies and Wi-Fi companies, are offering free internet to families. And so there's so many things. And then one last one I want to mention, this guy has over 200 tenants, and so he is allowing his tenants not to pay rent for 2 months. So I don't know what that adds up to, but it seems to me if you have 200 tenants and whatever the rent is, that seems like a lot of money that you would miss out on for 2 months. So with everything that we're hearing, there are still things going on where people are showing their love and their care during these dark times. And so, I hope that uplifts you today. I hope, in the spirit of Easter, we know Jesus, he got up. It was dark, but he got up and he brought all light. And I'm hoping that you will see the light during these dark times, as there are people who are showing love and care. So as we close today, the first point is there is love and caring during dark times. So don't get it twisted. I've noticed that some of the news shows that I've watched, they now have a faith segment or a morning boost or something like that, because they know that people need more uplifting news and information during these times. The next point is be a blessing during these dark times. So, what is it that you can do? How can you help? How can you show your love and care during these dark times? The third point is allow the love that Jesus showed to fill you with hope. Think about that he was dying on the cross and he asked God to forgive them. Think about that. He was dying on the cross and he told the man, that you will be with me. Think about that. He could have actually gotten off the cross, but he chose to stay. He chose to die for our sins. And then we know he rose. Hence, we have this great and wonderful Easter celebration. And then the last point is always the same that I want to leave with you, and that is that God is faithful. And how do we know that? If we just, again, look back over our lives and we think about what God has done, we know that God is faithful. As I close today, I would like to wish everyone a happy, safe, and blessed Easter. And I have to tell you, I am looking forward to being back in the church with my church family once all of this is done. So take care. Don't forget there's love and caring during these dark times. Happy Easter.